The life of Sarah was to many impeccable. She had the job she had always dreamed of, lived in a beautiful apartment in the city, and, at a glance, everything seemed in place. But within her, something was out of tune. There was a growing void that no success or material achievement seemed to fill. She followed the routine like clockwork, believing that in time, that feeling would disappear. It was a Tuesday like any other when, after leaving work, Sarah walked briskly through the bustling streets. The cold winter night's wind blew, and she tightened the scarf around her neck, trying to keep warm. As she walked, distracted by her thoughts, something caught her attention. There, sitting at the corner of a dimly lit street, a homeless man watched her. He asked for nothing. He did not reach out for coins. He just looked at her with a serenity she did not expect to find. Sarah hesitated, but the meeting of their eyes made her stop, even if just for a second. It was then that the unexpected happened. "Do you have time to have dinner with me?" he asked, in a low but clear voice, as if he already knew she would say yes. Sarah blinked, surprised by the proposal. It was such a strange request, so out of the ordinary, that for a moment she thought she had heard wrong. "Dinner," she repeated, more to herself than to him. She was about to decline, as anyone would when approached like that, but something about the way he spoke, something in his eyes, made her pause. There was no desperation or hunger in that man's gaze. There was a calmness that disarmed her. And in an impulse she herself could not explain, Sarah nodded. As they walked together in silence through the cold streets, Sarah could not help but wonder what had led her to say yes. She was tired of the routine, the endless meetings, the growing void in her heart. Maybe that night, accepting such an unusual invitation was the way to break the cycle. But still, the doubt lingered in the air. Why her? And what could a simple dinner reveal? Upon arriving at a modest little restaurant, the man guided her to a table in the corner. Sarah sat down, not knowing what to expect. It was as if, at that moment, the world around her had slowed down. Something deep, invisible, was about to happen. And the dinner she could never have predicted would become the turning point in her journey. The atmosphere inside the small restaurant was cozy, though simple. Sarah observed the aged wooden walls, the few occupied tables, the smell of freshly brewed coffee in the air. Everything seemed to be part of a carefully arranged scene, as if that night was predestined. The man in front of her remained silent, studying the menu with a tranquility that intrigued her. When the waiter came to the table, he ordered 2 simple dishes, soup and fresh bread. Sarah, still speechless, agreed to the order, curious about how the situation would unfold. While waiting for the food, she could no longer contain her curiosity. "Why did you invite me?" she asked, trying to hide the confusion in her voice. She expected a vague answer, or even some kind of simple justification, but what she received was a penetrating look, full of meaning. "Because you needed to be here tonight," he calmly replied, "and somehow so did I." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. There was something different about that man. It wasn't just his disheveled appearance or the way he spoke with such conviction, but the feeling that he knew more about her than any stranger ever could. It was as if he was speaking to a part of her that even she did not recognize. "I needed to," Sarah echoed, trying to disguise her disbelief. "How can you know that?" He smiled, a serene, almost paternal smile. "People cross our path for reasons we don't always understand. Often we seek answers outside ourselves, but the truth is they've always been inside. You came here because there's something you need to discover, not for me, but for yourself." Those words made Sarah look away, as if he had touched a wound she didn't know existed. There was truth in what he said, even if she couldn't explain how or why. The emptiness she felt in her life, the discomfort that followed her like a shadow, seemed to take shape in the face of that simple observation. She was searching for something, and maybe until that moment she didn't know what it was. The waiter brought the soup, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah picked up the spoon mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on the man in front of her, still waiting for answers. He began to eat slowly, silently, and for a brief moment, she had the sensation that time had stopped. "What is your name?" she asked, hoping at least to find out who the man was who was turning her night into a growing mystery. He paused for a moment as if considering the answer. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is what you're willing to discover tonight." The words hung in the air laden with meaning. Sarah felt a slight tension in her chest, as if she were about to cross an invisible threshold, not knowing what she would find on the other side. What did he know about her? And why, somehow, did all of this feel so right even though it was so inexplicable? Sarah could barely touch the soup in front of her. The man's words echoed in her mind like an ever more intriguing riddle. How could he know something about her that even her closest friends didn't perceive? What did he know that she couldn't understand? The idea of sitting across from someone who seemed to have answers to questions she herself didn't know how to formulate deeply disturbed her. The conversation unfolded slowly, almost meditatively. The man ate quietly without the slightest rush, as if time had no meaning at that moment, and, in a way, for Sarah, it really seemed that time had slowed down. Each second there stretched out, laden with a weight she couldn't name. "Have you ever felt like you were living a life that wasn't yours?" he asked, without looking away from her. His voice low, but with a tone that sounded more like a statement than a question. Sarah took a deep breath. The truth was that, as difficult as it was to admit, she had been feeling that way for some time. The job that once excited her was now just a burden. The people around her, though dear, seemed distant, as if they didn't really see her. And deep down there was that constant feeling that something was missing, something essential. "Yes," she whispered, surprising herself with the honesty that escaped her lips. "But I don't know why." The man let the spoon rest on the plate and leaned slightly forward. "Because you have strayed from who you really are. Sometimes life's demands push us away from our essence, and when we realize it, we're living to meet others' expectations, while our soul cries out for something deeper." Sarah felt a knot form in her throat. His words, though enigmatic, sounded with frightening clarity. It was as if he were articulating exactly what she felt, but had never been able to put into words. Something inside her was starting to break, a barrier she had long erected without realizing it. "But how did I get here?" she asked, almost breathless, seeking some kind of answer that would make her understand what was happening inside her. The man gave a gentle yet sad smile. "Life is a path that often leads us down trails we don't consciously choose, but now you're here, sitting at the table, facing a choice. You can continue to live as you always have, or you can listen to what your heart is saying and allow yourself to seek something greater. The choice is always yours, Sarah." She couldn't remember telling him her name, yet the familiarity with which he called her didn't surprise her. It was as if, on some deep level, he always knew who she was, just as he seemed to know the secrets she barely dared admit to herself. The silence between them stretched on, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to dive into the quiet. There was no need to fill the space with words. The silence was comforting, almost sacred. She felt that something was moving inside her, something she didn't fully understand but knew was important. The meal continued, but now it seemed that everything had changed. The soup was just a detail. The restaurant around them, with its few customers and soft light, seemed to exist in a world apart. At that moment, there was only Sarah, the man, and the revealing silence that filled the spaces between them. As the dinner went on, Sarah felt more and more like a stranger in her own skin. The man, still shrouded in mystery, seemed to be revealing small parts of a larger truth, as if he were pulling invisible threads that connected her soul to something she had forgotten. She looked around the restaurant, the environment now seeming more like a stage set for a play whose script she didn't know. But somehow, everything made sense. There was a deep connection that, though not visible, was undeniable. The man before her seemed to carry the key to a mystery she didn't even know she was trying to unravel. He watched her patiently, as if waiting for the right moment to continue. Then, with an almost palpable serenity, he spoke again. "Did you know that sometimes the universe puts people in our path to remind us of something important?" He paused briefly, as if the words needed space to seep into her mind. "Not always do these people stay for long, but when they cross our path, they carry a message that, if we're attentive, can change the course of our lives." Sarah listened in silence, reflecting on these words. She thought of all the people who had passed through her life. Some stayed, others left as quickly as they came. Was he referring to someone from her past, or was he himself one of those people? "Why me?" Sarah asked, more to herself than to him. "Why tonight?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes softened as if they were about to reveal something much greater than a simple answer. "Because you're ready," he finally said, with a certainty that made her heart race. "The answers you seek are not in the past or the future. They are in the now, in this moment." Sarah felt a wave of emotion rise within her. For years she had sought meaning in so many things, in work, in friendships, in goals achieved, but always with the feeling that something was eluding her. And now, sitting there, with a complete stranger, she began to realize that perhaps what she was seeking was not anywhere, but within her. "But what should I do?" she asked, feeling the weight of the words. It wasn't just a question about the night, but about her entire life. The man looked at her deeply, as if contemplating the universe within her eyes. "You're already doing it. The first step is always to listen, and now you're listening to what your soul has been trying to tell you for so long." There was a warmth in Sarah's chest that she couldn't explain, a mix of comfort and restlessness. It was as if all the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, albeit slowly. What once seemed like a meaningless life now revealed layers of depth she had never noticed. Deep down, Sarah knew he was right. The silence, the conversation, the presence of that man, everything was leading her inward to the place where the answers had always been, waiting to be heard. And for the first time, she allowed herself to be at peace with not knowing. Sometimes clarity came from the space between the questions, not the answers. The dinner was ending, but Sarah knew that the journey was just beginning. "Are you enjoying the story's path? Shall we move on to the next chapter?" That simple dinner had ended, but Sarah knew that something much deeper had been awakened. The man discreetly paid the bill, and together they left the restaurant. The night's air was colder now, but Sarah felt a strange warmth within her, a sense that that moment carried a meaning she still couldn't fully comprehend. "Can I walk you somewhere?" she asked, feeling strangely connected to that man, as if upon leaving him, a part of the truth she was beginning to discover would escape as well. He just smiled, shaking his head slowly. "Don't worry about me. My path is another, but yours is still here." Sarah somehow already expected that answer. He was like a temporary presence in her life, someone who had appeared at the right time to say what she needed to hear, but whose permanence wasn't part of the plan. She felt a pang in her chest, an inexplicable melancholy, as if she were about to lose something precious. "I wish I could understand all this," she confessed, looking at him with a mix of confusion and gratitude. "You've made me see so many things, but I still feel lost." He looked at her with silent compassion. "Sometimes, Sarah, the answers come slowly, like pieces of a puzzle that only complete when we're ready to see the whole. Don't rush the process. Everything is unfolding as it should." She swallowed hard, trying to absorb the depth of those words. There was something comforting in knowing that not all answers needed to be immediate, but at the same time, the uncertainty about the future weighed on her mind. "But how will I know if I'm on the right path?" The man took a deep breath, turning to look at the dark sky dotted with stars. "The right path is the one where you listen to your soul more than the voice of fear. Whenever love and faith guide your decisions, you're where you should be." Sarah reflected on this in silence. She had spent so much time worrying about meeting others' expectations that she barely knew how to listen to her own soul. But that night, something in her had changed. The inner voice that once seemed muffled was now beginning to be heard, albeit timidly. The man took a step forward, as if preparing to leave, but before turning away he stopped. "One last thing, Sarah. Sometimes we find what we're looking for in the most unexpected places. The answer you seek may not be in work or the people around you, but in something much simpler. Look around, pay attention to the details. Life is always showing us the way, if we know where to look." She nodded, absorbing every word. There was a simple, profound truth in that advice, a truth she already felt growing within her. Sarah knew that that night had been a turning point, even if she didn't know exactly where she was headed. When she looked again, the man had disappeared around the corner, as if he were an ephemeral figure, a messenger of something greater. Sarah stood there, alone on the sidewalk, feeling the cold air hit her face. And for the first time in a long time, she took a deep breath, not with anxiety but with a sense of silent peace. Something inside her was changing, even if she couldn't yet see clearly what it was. The night had revealed that there were more mysteries to be discovered, not outside, but within herself. And although the future was uncertain, Sarah felt that she was, finally, on the right path. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious man. Everything he had said reverberated in her mind like echoes of something greater, something she still couldn't fully decipher. There was a restlessness, but also an unknown peace, as if she had touched a truth far beyond her immediate understanding. The routine at work continued. Emails filled her inbox. Endless meetings dragged on, but nothing seemed to hold the same importance as before. It was as if, after that night, the world around her had lost part of its rush, part of its urgency. On Friday, at the end of the workday, Sarah decided to take a walk through an old neighborhood in the city. Something was pulling her there, a place she rarely went, but for some reason seemed to be the right destination that night. As she walked through the narrow streets, surrounded by old buildings, she felt a strange familiarity, as if she had been there before. The sound of her footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalks was the only sound around her, and the air was charged with a subtle 10. Then, as she turned a corner, Sarah stopped abruptly. Before her, sitting on a worn wooden bench, was the same man who had transformed her night days before. He was there, as if waiting for her. A chill ran down her spine, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was from surprise or something deeper. "I knew you would come," he said without lifting his eyes. His voice had the same serenity that enveloped her before, but now there was something more. A gravity, a weight she hadn't felt before. "There are things that need to be said tonight." Sarah approached slowly, feeling her heart race. "You knew how?" He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes carrying a depth that made her feel exposed, as if he could see every thought, every doubt that crossed her mind. "Because everything has a purpose, Sarah. Our meeting that night was no coincidence. I knew you would need to find something, and that when you were ready you would come here." She sat next to him, speechless. What was he about to reveal, and why was that sense of familiarity growing every second? "There's something I need to tell you," he began, with a calm that only intensified the mystery of the moment. "That night when I invited you to dinner, it wasn't the first time we met. You may not remember, but our paths crossed many years ago, at a moment that shaped the person you became." Sarah frowned, confusion taking over her mind. "How is that? I don't remember you." He nodded slightly, as if he already expected that reaction. "You were just a child, Sarah, but I was there. That day when your life changed forever. The day you lost someone important." The memory she had tried to bury for so many years came to the surface, sudden and painful. The image of the car accident, the memory of her mother at the wheel, the sound of brakes, and the deafening silence that followed. Sarah froze, her breathing becoming heavier. "You were there." The words escaped her lips almost as a whisper. The man nodded again. "I was." And at that moment something much greater was at play. "Your mother asked me to protect you, to guide you when the time came. And now, that time has come." Sarah could barely process what she was hearing. He knew her mother, and why had she never known this before? Everything seemed to crumble and rebuild at the same time within her mind. "But how? How is it possible that you were there and I never knew?" He sighed, his eyes carrying a gentle sadness. "Not everything can be explained, Sarah. Some encounters are made of a deeper connection, one that transcends time and space. And now, your mother asked that I help her show you the way." Sarah felt the tears burning in her eyes, but they weren't of sadness. They were of understanding, of a connection she couldn't deny. The man who had guided her there wasn't just any stranger. He was the answer to a silent prayer her soul had been making since that day. She took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. Life as she knew it would never be the same. Sarah sat in silence as the man's words took root within her. It was as if the pieces of an invisible puzzle were finally coming together, revealing a larger picture she hadn't been able to see until that moment. The idea that her mother, even after so much time, still cared for her, still guided her in ways she never imagined, brought a mix of comfort and awe. "So, have you always been nearby?" she asked, her voice trembling, trying to grasp the magnitude of what he had just revealed. The man nodded gently. "Yes, but from afar. Life is full of meetings and partings, and often we only perceive the importance of those connections when we're ready to see. Your mother knew you would reach this point, and she knew you would need guidance. That's why I'm here." Sarah looked at him, incredulity still battling acceptance. She didn't know how, but somehow she felt that it was true. There was a serenity in his words, a depth that couldn't be fabricated. The man before her was more than he seemed to be, and although she still didn't fully understand, a part of her knew that this was the right moment for her life to change. "But what do you want from me? What do I need to do now?" The question came out with an urgency she couldn't control. Throughout her life, Sarah had sought answers to a void she couldn't name. Now, faced with a truth so much greater than she could ever imagine, she longed to know what her next step would be. The man took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on hers. "What you need to do now is simple, Sarah. Trust. Trust in the path your soul is tracing. Don't seek immediate answers. What you discovered tonight is just the beginning of a much greater journey. Your mother left more than memories. She left the strength within you, the same strength that guided her in her most difficult moments. And now, that strength is with you too." Sarah felt a wave of emotion invade her body. The mention of her mother brought memories she had long tried to bury, but instead of pain, what now emerged was a sense of peace, as if she were closer to her mother than she had ever been since the accident. And for the first time in many years, she felt she was connected to something greater than her doubts and uncertainties. "But what about you? What will happen to you?" Sarah asked, feeling a strange fear that after that night the man would disappear from her life forever. He smiled gently, as if he already expected that question. "My mission with you is almost complete. The rest of the path you must travel alone. But remember, Sarah, you will never truly be alone. There is always something greater, something invisible, taking care of us, even in the hardest moments." His words touched her heart in a profound way. For years, Sarah had felt alone, struggling against the pressures of the world and the void that consumed her. But now, before that man, sitting on a random bench in an old street, she felt that something had changed. A connection had been restored, not just with her mother, but with something beyond, something she couldn't see, but now knew existed. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said, her voice choked with emotion. The man shook his head slowly. "There's no need for thanks. Just live your life with the awareness that there is more than meets the eye. And when you feel lost again, look within. Your mother will be there, guiding you." And with those words he stood up, giving Sarah one last look before he started to walk down the narrow street. Sarah watched him leave, feeling as if she was saying goodbye to something important, but at the same time carrying within her a new strength. The man disappeared around the corner, and suddenly she found herself alone. But instead of loneliness, she felt a presence around her, a gentle and reassuring presence. Sarah knew that somehow her mother was still there, in every step she took, in every decision she made. And although the journey was hers now, she no longer needed to be afraid. She took a deep breath, allowing the cold night air to fill her lungs. The world around her seemed clearer, more alive, and Sarah knew without a doubt that her life would never be the same. The days after that encounter were different from anything Sarah had ever experienced. There was a lightness, a serenity that seemed to permeate every moment. Even amidst daily obligations and the rush of life, she felt enveloped by a calm presence, as if an invisible part of her mother was by her side, guiding her steps. Sarah didn't see the man again. She even tried to retrace the paths, returning to the same streets, looking around as if, somehow, he might reappear. But in her heart, she knew that he had fulfilled the purpose of his presence. What remained now was to follow her journey, connected to the truth he had helped to reveal. One night, lying in her bed, Sarah began to reflect on everything that had happened. His words still echoed in her mind. The right path is the one where you listen to your soul more than the voice of fear. She had never understood that as clearly as now. Her whole life had been guided by fear, the fear of not being enough, of failing, of not meeting the expectations placed on her. But at that moment, something had broken. She had begun to hear another voice, a voice that spoke of what was true. It was then that a decision matured in her heart. Sarah knew she needed to change something in her life. It wasn't an external change, but something deeper, something that began within her. She could no longer ignore the call she felt, a call that demanded more than she was willing to offer until that moment. The next morning, Sarah decided to take some time for herself. It had been a long time since she had done that, always putting work, responsibilities, and others' expectations first. She took the car and drove to a special place, a remote park, where her mother used to take her when she was a child. It was a quiet place surrounded by old trees, with a small lake in the center. Sarah didn't know why she had chosen that place, but she felt it was the right one. Upon arriving, she parked the car and walked to an old tree by the lake's edge. She remembered sitting there with her mother, listening to her stories about life and love. Sitting in the same place as years ago, Sarah closed her eyes and allowed the memories to flood her. She could almost feel her mother's presence beside her, her soft voice, the loving touch of her hands. "Am I doing the right thing?" she whispered, not expecting a direct answer. The wind gently swayed the leaves above her, and Sarah felt a deep peace invade her heart. It was at that moment, sitting there, that Sarah finally understood. Life wasn't about finding ready-made answers or waiting for miracles that happened grandiosely. Sometimes the miracle was in the small things, in the ability to allow oneself to stop, listen to one's own heart, and move forward even without knowing what the future held. That was what the man had tried to teach her, and more than that, it was what her mother had always tried to show. Sarah opened her eyes, looking at the lake before her, its calm waters reflecting the soft light of the late afternoon. Tears silently rolled down her face, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of acceptance, of a new understanding of what it meant to live with purpose. She knew that her life wouldn't be perfect, and that there would still be moments of uncertainty, but for the first time she felt that she was in control of her journey. And somehow she knew that her mother was proud of her, not for her achievements or what she had accomplished, but for finally finding the way back to herself. Sarah remained there for a long time, just watching, feeling the moment. It was the beginning of something new, something she didn't need to rush or fully understand. Sometimes all we needed was to stop and listen. And Sarah had finally learned to do that. Sarah's return to her daily life was marked by a subtle, yet powerful change. She began to notice the little things that had previously gone unnoticed, the sunlight reflecting on the windows, a stranger's smile on the street, the gentle sound of the wind through the trees. Everything seemed more alive, more intense, as if finally she had awakened to the reality around her, seeing the beauty in the small things that were once ignored amid the rush. At work, Sarah was surprised to notice that the things that used to make her anxious now seemed easier to handle. There was a new perspective, a new way of facing challenges. She still performed her tasks with the same dedication, but something inside her had changed. It was no longer about meeting others' expectations or achieving goals that seemed empty. It was more about being present, listening to her own heart, and allowing life to flow, without struggling so much against what she couldn't. One day, while organizing some papers on her desk, she received an unexpected message from an old childhood friend. They had lost contact years ago, and the name Emily flashing on her phone screen brought a wave of nostalgia. Sarah hesitated before opening the message, remembering the moments they had shared. Emily was someone who had always been close to her mother, and for some reason, that message seemed to carry a greater meaning. "Sarah, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I think we need to meet. There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. When you're available, let me know. With love, Emily." Sarah read and reread the message several times, her heart racing. There was something in those words that left her restless, as if suddenly she was being called to discover one more piece of the puzzle. Without hesitation, she replied, setting up a meeting for the weekend. When Saturday arrived, Sarah drove to a quiet cafe in a tree-lined neighborhood, where she and Emily had met many times in the past. As she parked the car, she took a deep breath, trying to calm the anxiety that arose. She knew that this meeting would be more than a simple conversation between old friends. There was something important behind that invitation. As soon as she entered the cafe, she spotted Emily sitting at a table near the window. She waved with a warm smile, but Sarah noticed a certain tension in her eyes. Sitting across from her friend, Sarah couldn't help but notice how much time had passed for both of them. Emily had the same kindness as before, but now there was a maturity in her gestures, as if time had carved new layers into her personality. "Sarah, it's so good to see you," Emily began, her smile sincere but the concern still visible. "It's good to see you too, Emily," Sarah replied, trying to disguise the curiosity burning inside her. "What did you want to tell me?" Emily hesitated for a moment, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about your mother lately. There's something you might not know, something she asked me to tell you, but I never knew when the right time would be." Sarah's heart raced. Her mother, what else didn't she know? "Emily, what was it?" Emily took a deep breath, lowering her head for a moment before meeting Sarah's gaze again. "Before your mother passed away, she reached out to me. She was worried about you, about what would happen next. She knew you would have a long road ahead, full of questions and uncertainties, and she asked me to take care of you in a special way. But not only that, she said that one day you would find the answers you needed, and that I should give you something when you were ready." Sarah could barely breathe. "What did she give you?" Emily opened her bag, taking out a small envelope yellowed by time. "She gave me this. She asked that I give it to you when I felt the time was right. And after everything I've learned about you recently, I think you're ready now." With trembling hands, Sarah took the envelope, feeling the weight of what her mother had left for her. It was as if at that moment, time had stopped, and all the questions she had carried over the years could finally be answered. She didn't know what was inside the envelope, but she knew it would change everything. The first step toward the truth her mother had prepared was there, in her hands. Sarah held the envelope with such care that it seemed it might fall apart between her fingers. There was something sacred in that piece of aged paper, something that connected the present to the past in a way she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Her heart was pounding, almost as if it knew that what was inside that envelope would be the definitive turning point in her life. Emily watched in silence, respecting the moment. She knew that those words written by Sarah's mother carried more than simple memories. They were a passage, a connection to a truth Sarah didn't yet know, but was about to be revealed. "Do you want to open it now?" Emily asked softly, as if she were afraid to break the magic of the moment. Sarah looked at the envelope, hesitating for just a second. She knew that from the moment she opened it, nothing would be the same, but she was ready. She had come this far to discover what her mother wanted to tell her, and now, more than ever, she felt she had the strength to deal with whatever it was. "Yes," she replied, her voice low but determined. "Now is the time." With delicacy, she broke the seal of the envelope and took out a carefully folded letter. The paper, yellowed and fragile with time, bore her mother's familiar handwriting. That sight brought a lump to her throat, and for a moment, Sarah needed to pause to breathe, trying to contain the wave of emotion that threatened to overflow. It was as if her mother were right there, speaking to her through the words written so many years before. Sarah began to read, her voice barely a whisper. "My dear Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this letter, it's because the right time has finally come. I always knew you would have a challenging path ahead, full of questions and uncertainties, but also of great strength and courage. And I know that although I cannot be by your side physically, I will be with you in spirit, always guiding your steps, even in the moments when you feel most lost." Sarah paused for a moment, the tears already beginning to fall down her face. Her mother's words were soft and full of love, but there was something more there, something that seemed to carry a deeper meaning. "There is something you need to know, something I have kept for a long time, waiting for the day you would be ready to understand. When you were little, shortly after the accident that took your father from us, I made a promise. I promised I would do everything in my power to protect you, to ensure you had a full life, even if he was no longer here. But there was a truth I never told you, because I didn't want you to carry the weight of that responsibility while you were still too young to undercease." Sarah felt the air leave her for a moment. What was her mother trying to tell her? That night of the accident, something else happened, something I never told anyone. There was a man, a stranger, who appeared unexpectedly. He seemed to know things about me, about our life, and he told me that at the right time he would appear to guide you. He promised that when you were ready he would show you the way and that I shouldn't worry. Sarah froze. Her mother's words described exactly the man she had met weeks ago, the man who had invited her to dinner, who had guided her in such an unexpected way. He wasn't just any stranger. He was the messenger her mother mentioned. "I know this may sound unbelievable, my dear, but trust me. What happened that night was beyond what we can understand. There are things we cannot explain, but that are part of something much greater. That man, if he crosses your path, will be your guide. He will help you find the answers you seek and lead you on your journey. Don't be afraid, Sarah. You are stronger than you imagine, and I will be with you always." Sarah's hands trembled as she held the letter. Everything the man had told her, the connections she had felt, now made sense. He wasn't just any stranger. He had been sent by her mother, years before, to be there when she needed him most. "Live your life with courage, my dear, and always remember love never—" "I love you forever, Mom." Sarah closed the letter, tears freely running down her face. It was as if her mother were there beside her, holding her hand, whispering those words in her ear. There was a deep peace in knowing that she had never truly been alone, that the whole path up to that point had been guided by something greater. Emily, in silence, placed her hand on hers in a gesture of support. Sarah couldn't speak, but she didn't need to. There was a certainty now, an unshakable truth that would guide her for the rest of her life. The envelope had been opened, the truth revealed, and Sarah finally was at peace with what lay ahead.